So good afternoon, my friends. Thank you very much for being here with me. I want to thank for the beautiful comments, the likes and the donations to everyone, and I will keep on reading from the Break the Cycle. That's Peter Gerlach's tool to overcome childhood wounds, addiction and conditioning. Okay, and it's a do-it-yourself kind of tool. Okay. As always, I will leave the links down below so you can read with me, okay? So, this overview highlights what wound recovery means, requisites for true recovery, pseudo versus true recovery, typical wound reduction goals, types of recovery, help, typical signs of true recovery, and 7 common recovery themes. This article assumes you are familiar with the intro to this site and the premises underlying it, self-improvement lesson 1, the toxic wounds plus ignorance cycle, and grown wooden children, GWCs, and typical wound effects. Okay? Introduction. Premise. Young kids raised in a low nutrients dysfunctional homes survive versus thrive by automatically forming a disorganized group of personality subcells, a fragmented personality. This causes up to 6 significant psychological wounds: disabled true self, excessive shame or guilt, excessive fears, trusting too little or too much, excessive reality distortions, and difficulty empathizing, bonding, and receiving, feeling, and giving unconditional love. That's very important. Until these wounds are admitted and significantly reduced, they combine with unawareness to cause major personal and relationship, occupational, and health problems. I call adult survivors of early abandonment, neglect, and abuse grown wounded children, GWCs. The media calls us adult children of toxic, which means wounded, parents of dysfunctional, low nurturing families. Since 1981, I've spent over 18,000 hours consulting with more than 1,000 troubled women, men, and some of their kids. My opinion is that well over 90% of the adults didn't know about wounds plus unawareness cycle, that they inherit and they are unintentional passing on their vulnerable kids and grandkids. And since psychological wounds and other hazards put needy adults at risk of unwise mate and childhood conception choices and eventually divorcing psychologically or legally. This free online self-improvement course can help couples make wise commitment and conception choice and protect their descendants from inheriting toxic wounds plus unawareness. I've been learning how to reduce my own GWC's wounds since I discovered them in 1986. This gradual healing process helped me release lifelong years, shame and guilt by freeing my true self to guide me, harmonizing my personal subselves and significantly improve life, relationship and spiritual awareness. Don't forget that this is about Peter Gerlach, so he's sharing his own experience. Okay? My clinical work with hundreds of recovering GWCs, grown wooden children, suggests that my own healing experience is common. I've benefited from studying and integrating the works of over 24 veteran therapists and researchers focused on understanding, healing, and preventing these pervasive, crippling psychological wounds. This article overviews a complex multi-year personal healing process recovery. For more perspective and detail on reducing versus curing psychological wounds, see Lesson 1, the guidebook, Who's Really Running Your Life. It integrates the key web cycles in this first online lesson, and it's available in print or as an ebook. What is wound recovery? It is an intentional, multi-year mental, psychological, spiritual, social process. I would also add spiritual. Some wooden people eventually hit bottom, break lifelong denials, and start this healing process, often in middle life. Some GWCs begin primarily recovering before hitting bottom. Millions of other GWCs endure decades of unhappiness, wound their kids, and die prematurely without ever knowing their wounds and how to reduce them. Well, as I understood, I think that Peter Gerlach went through an awakening process when he was 46. And the people that do not recover mean they are simply asleep. They are being managed by the matrix of lack. That's just what I think. Okay. When I came into this world, I already had my third eye open, so I realized the game um, immediately. And when I was 8 years old, I asked the universe for certain things to happen in my life so that I could live the life I'm living now. Okay. Primarily recovery and hitting through bottom versus pseudo bottom can trigger years of increasing self-awareness and knowledge could promote permanent changes in key attitudes, values, behaviors, and relationships. The changes include learning how to identify and grieve major losses, broken bonds from early childhood through the present, which means learning how to finish grieving them. This is very important. True versus pseudo wound recovery involves recognizing and freeing your innately wise, resident true self to organize other personality subselves into a cooperative team working towards clear long-term personal goals. Part of this process involves seeking and accepting human and spiritual help and controlling any addictions, maintaining sobriety. Okay, this means to align your chakras. Okay, to shift, align your chakras, or also you can also see it as the 7 deadly sins, to transform it in the 7 vital qualities. Okay. Typical false selves are scared to let go of control and follow the true self. This is to trust the 5D. So they can go through the motions of recovery, talk the talk, without really changing toxic attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. This protective strategy can be called pseudo-trial recovery. When a GWC is in pseudo-recovery, they don't experience the positive life changes summarized below. Many mental health professionals feel that psychological injuries from early childhood trauma can be greatly reduced, if not totally cured, in stressful circumstances. GWCs may still be taken over by protective false selves and old coping attitudes and behaviors. For example, lying, stealing, self-neglect, etc. recur. These relapses diminish as wounded reduction continues and becomes a way of life. Pseudo-recovery, permanently reducing psychological wounds, usually requires hitting through a pseudo-bottom. That involves converting lifelong beliefs and rituals into stable new attitudes, values, and activities despite anxieties and perhaps other disapprovals. This can result in a major internal conflict. Some personality selves say we must change, others say never. To resolve, well, I would say that when other personality selves say never means that you have a virus in your energetical field and you need to really do a lot of meditation and deconditioning. And besides doing this, break the cycle, I would suggest to understand yourself through numerology, astrology, and human design in order to reach your true potential. Okay? To resolve this impasse, ruling selves gradually compromised by thinking, speaking, and acting like a recovering person. A superficial change, but not committing to true values like really trusting your true self to lead. It's difficult. It might be difficult to trust something you have never felt. Okay, so you really need to trust the 5D. Okay, increase your vibrations and behave and change one habit every day or every week or every 21 days, and stick to it. And don't allow yourself to be corrupted by the easy pleasures of life. Okay. Or also don't be too strict. Okay. One of my clients in pseudo recovery was a bright, articulated divorced mother. She said proudly, "I've read every self book ever printed on codependency, 12-step recovery, spirituality, and toxic relationships." She would quote the authors and key ideas in a great length and spent hours counseling others on healing inner wounds. Yet at 40, she was obese, diabetic, in a codependent relationship with a terribly wounded, never married man, stuck in the depleting relationship with her very wounded mother, living in poverty and offer on welfare, and enduring the rejection of one of her two teenage daughters. Okay, so you can know everything, but you need to walk the talk, okay? She vehemently insisted that these had all other causes and she was in true recovery from a low nurturing childhood. She was a reality distortion, which means her artful magician sub-self at work. Some years after I wrote this, I heard this woman died alone in a wheelchair, apparently without ever hitting her true bottom. There are millions of others like her around the world who are unaware of what you are reading here. Thousands of 12-step anonymous and other self-help meetings are full of such tormented people who work to stop toxic compulsions and deny their compensation by using other forms of self-medication. For example, addictions to food, work, tobacco, sexual gratification, web surfing, shopping, gambling, collecting, etc. In Alcoholics Anonymous AA, addicts in pseudo-recovery are called dry drunks. They have stopped using alcohol to self-medicate, but haven't changed their stinking thinking, false self-attitudes, and harmful behaviors. Their words and actions don't match, for example, which means they have elaborated justifications and excuses for not walking their talk. This is because they are still dominated by protective false selves. Do you know anyone in pseudo-recovery? The personal recovery process is complex, painful, confusing, scary, freeing, exhilarating, empowering, and literally life-changing. Every birth, family, system, personality, and mix of psychological wounds is so unique, so there is no absolutely right way to recover. This article summarizes healing requirements, goals, and guidelines that I believe apply to all GWCs. 7 requisites for true recovery. Though each wounded person recovers in their own way, permanent healing seems to require these factors: clear personal and social awareness. You have to be aware of your perceptions. Knowledge and life experience. Steady motivation to heal, often from hitting true bottom. Nourishing spiritual versus relation growth and faith. Stable sobriety. Freedom from toxic compulsions and obsessions. A pro-recovery environment, and a range of accessible recovery resources. Here's some perspective of these requisites. First, awareness. Wanting to become habitually conscious of 1.1. What I think, feel, and need now and over time. And 1.2. How I behave in various relationships and situations now and over time. Evolving self-awareness promotes recognizing these factors in other people. This helps in choosing a pro-recovery environment and communicating effectively with other people. Other requisite for effective wound reduction is 2. Knowledge and life experience. Psychological wounded people need to 2.1. Learn A. about early childhood abandonment, neglect, and abuse, and B. how to recognize psychological wounds these stressors usually cause. Lesson 1, Parts 1 and 2. And 2.2. Learn about personality sub-selves and how to harmonize them under the leadership of a wise resident true self. Inner family therapy. See Lesson 1, Part 3. And 2.3. Learn to apply communication, grieving, and relationship basics. Lessons 2 to 4. And committed recovers need to 2.4. Evolve a clear understanding of high nurturing families. Lesson 5, Effective Parenting, Lesson 6, and the Wounds plus Ignorance Cycle and what it means. People need to accumulate years of life experience to understand and validate these topics. Gog your knowledge of them, taking these quizzes when you finish here. A GWC also needs 3 stable motivations to change. This requisite usually requires accumulating enough pain, frustration, awareness, weariness and despair, hitting true bottom, and decide I can no longer live like this, be controlled by a false self. This motivation is especially strong for wooden parents and young vulnerable kids. Another recovery asset is for healthy spiritual growth and faith. Typical recovering GWCs want to 4.1 evolve steadily faith in an attentive, responsive, benign versus warmful, vengeful, and jealous. Higher power, and then 4.2 give up control to this being and turn overwhelming problems to it, her, him, or again daily serenity. And some recoveries need to 5 admit and control any addictions. Paradox. Addictions, harmful compulsions self-medicate against inner pain caused by inherent psychological wounds and unawareness. Reducing this pain requires clear thinking and self-care. False selves often prevent one or both these. This is why hitting true bottom is usually needed to break this paradox and achieve stable sobriety. Achieving sobriety for at least 12 to 18 months is the gateway to permanently reducing psychological wounds. Some GWCs can grow sobriety and reduce their wounds simultaneously. For more perspective on controlling versus curing harmful compulsions, see this and this after you finish this article. Another universal requisite for permanent wound reduction is a pro-recovery environment. Social environment can help or hinder the GWC's personal healing. People who create a pro-recovery environment are usually guided by their true selves and are working towards that, and they 6.2 can distinguish low nurturing dysfunctional from higher nurturing functional relationships, settings, and the belief systems, and they 6.3 understand and accept personality, subselves, and psychological laws, and pro-recovery supporters can 6.4 think clearly, empathize, and communicate effectively, and they 6.5 are evolving their own spiritual versus religions, faith, and unawareness, and they 6.6 generally versus dutifully, skeptically, or strategically support psychological wounded reduction. Acquiring such supporters usually involves a replacing some toxic family work, replacing some toxic family work and social relationships with more nurturing ones, and B, grieving related losses. Yes, this requires reducing or ending relationships with wooden parents, siblings, partners, lovers, and some co-workers and on friends. Atypical recoverers also need to 7 acquire and use resources. The more of these 7 requisites a psychological wounded person GWCs has, the more likely they are free the true self and permanently reduce their wounds over time. Pause and reflect. Can you name these 7 wound reductions requisites? How many of them do you have now? I have all of them. I've been working so hard for it. An overview of this GWC's recovery process. Trial or true recovery usually begins a traumatic trigger event or series of events which finally break lifelong protective denials. These events can include a prized relationship ending, bankruptcy, job losses, major injury, disability or illness, an abortion, a breakdown, and or child major distress. People in 12-step addiction management programs call this hitting bottom or hitting the wall. Addicts who relapse are said to have hit a false preliminary trial or pseudo bottom or wall. There are many kinds of recovery triggers. Some are sudden and dramatic. Others occur on a trip, watching a movie, taking a shower, in church or confrontation, driving to a store, reading in a sleepless night. I recall one divorced, middle-aged addicted saying, I realized one morning that my life was just great. I had to change. Approaching or experiencing middle age seems to take a hitting the wall more likely perhaps from really accepting one inevitably or limited remaining years, and eventually death. One wounded, grudged child begins to admit their inner pain and happiness to themselves and others. They often experience a confusing period of searching, mood swings, and disorientation. Lifelong attitudes and beliefs are no longer valid. My childhood wasn't as fine and normal, I've always thought, and new beliefs weren't clear and solid. This is typical of true core attitude shifts. Some early recoverers pull into themselves, isolate for a period, others frantically seek companionship. Through change, conversation, a book or TV program or sermon. They come across the idea of addiction recovery or some version of adult child GWC's recovery. Something clicks and they seek more information. The next stages of typical wound reduction are wonderfully varied. They can include combinations of A. Anger to learn, reading self-help books voraciously, bibliotherapy, using audio-video recovery tapes, going to recovery lectures, finding and taking with others in recovery, asking family history questions of relatives, meditating, journaling, etc. A grown feeling of aha, rightness of centeredness about cascading new personal awareness, without being able to identify why or starting to see their early nurturing deprivations. I realized my mom never said I love you or hugged me, and how those promoted GWC's personal traits, beliefs. I will never amount to much, and behaviors like self-neglect, vague or compelling longing for a better life blossoms. Unexpected belief may occur from some long-suffered physical aches, cramps, and pains, from some old sleeping and or digestive problems. A typical early recoverer's experience, a gradual shift of daily focus from external events, relationship goals, activities, and material things to internal awareness, explanation, and growth. This shift may feel alien at first and gradually morph into a wall of life, and growing a comprehension of how many other people are unaware of early childhood trauma and of being ruled by a protective false self, and their true self becomes more trusted, recovers gradually shift from blaming, resenting, criticizing, envying, and or fearing such people to calm compassion. They may try to persuade wooden people to try recover and gradually accept that such decisions must come from within, when the time is right for each person. A recovery people usually experience a gradual thawing of emotional and physical feelings repressed a number of decades, and or satisfying validation of lifelong unexplainable feelings. Usually urges of resentment, rage, deep sadness, usually healthy grief versus depression, guilt, regret, and profound shame. This thorning can come in rushes and or in unpredictable spurts over months or years. Growing conscious awareness of these legitimate feelings and their prior repressions can evoke intense feelings of anger at parents themselves and or a loving God. Long repressed grieving of lost childhoods, relationships, and life opportunities begins. As these emotions, senses, and unawareness cascade and amplify, typical people in early childhood reduction may start seeking and accepting various kinds of recovery help, including individual and on group therapy, self-help, for example, the 12-step groups, inpatient addiction treatment and self-care programs, spiritual communion and guidance, Tai Chi or meditation, classes, dance, massage or art therapy, retreats, and wilderness surrounds. All these experiences and add to a growing holistic awareness and of the original early nurturance deprivations, the old coping behaviors of their impacts, and the humbling, exciting visions of the person's true self, and the possible, truly authentic lifestyle. As the old denials and repressions dissolve, true people in true versus pseudo recovery confront a series of difficult inner and social conflicts. To keep healing inevitably requires changing or replacing self-harmful attitudes and beliefs. It's okay for me to work 65 hours a week. I can skip breakfast with no risk. Or There is no real God, with self-nurturing ones. Relationships, for example, with significantly wounded mates, parents, siblings, friends, or co-workers and employers. Activities like stealing, spying, lying, affairs, law breaking, polluting, bullying, abusing, and bigotry. And social memberships, working in a low nurturing organization and or regularly attending toxic, low nurturing church, club, and other group. Yes. Here, toxic means any relationship, activity, belief, value setting that consistently promotes a personal illness, shame, guilt, distrust of self and others, anxiety, confusion, frustration, pessimism, anger, despair, and failure, and or promotes b. disabling one's true self, restricted in its context. Toxic means holistic, self-harmful, and self-neglectful. A typical GWC's recoverers try this scary and exciting change, the alarm, guardian, and inner child subselves of other wounded and recovering people try to manipulate them back into the old ways of believing and behaving. True recovery rocks people's securities. Typical wound reduction is an organic versus linear process. There are periods of no progress, which are usually useful periods of rest and integration. Regression to the old ways, reminders, confusion inside of healthy change, doubt and or aimlessness. As these periods accumulate, there is a growing serene acceptance that true recovery from too little childhood nurturance is a self-evolving spiritual of attitude, values, and behavioral changes, increasingly satisfying new lifestyle and continual becoming. People who begin to understand personal subself wounds and the need for wound reduction can feel overwhelmed by the apparent complexity and alienation of these ideas. To offset this, consider how do you raise a healthy child? A day at a time. Personal recovery happens a day at a time by identifying and working patiently in the series of goals like this below. What follows assumes that you have done each step in parts 1 and 2 in lesson 1 and in this website. If you haven't done so recently, see this. Lesson 1 proposes an early childhood abandonment, neglect, and abuse trauma cause some of all the psychological wounds below. Once admitted and the requisites above are required, these injuries can be permanently reduced via patient self-healing. Overview of wound reduction goals. Healing inherent personal damage wounds is a multi-year process which becomes a way of life. It consists of becoming aware of the wounds, their origin symptoms, usually hitting true bottom versus pseudo bottom, and vowing to change, and then freeing the wise resident true self, retrain, unify, and lead the power personality subselves with human higher powered help, while gradually deepening compassion and spiritual awareness, and gradually improving personal communication, grieving, and social skills, and intentionally choosing nourishing versus depleting relationships and environments, and reducing toxic ones, and proactively protecting young people from inheriting psychological wounds plus unawareness. The overarching recovery goals are to free your true self from blending, unify, and harmonize your inner team, and convert each psychological wound into its opposite over time. Typical wound reduction is an organic versus linear process. There are periods of no progress, which are usually useful periods of rest and integration, regression of the old ways, reminders, confusing, and healthy change, doubt, or aimlessness. At these periods accumulate, there is a growing serene acceptance that true recovery from too little childhood nurturance is an ever-evolving spiral of attitudes, values, behavioral changes, and increasingly satisfying new lifestyle, and a continually becoming. People who begin to understand personality subself wounds and the need for wound reduction can feel overwhelmed by the apparent complexity and alienness of these ideas. To offset this, consider How do you raise a healthy child? A day at a time. Personal recovery happens a day at a time by identifying and working patiently at a series of goals like this below. What follows assumes that you have done each step in part 1 and 2. Psychological wounds. 1. A disabled true self false self-dominance. For example, having well-intentioned but distrustful guardian and young selves that take over the true self causes stress. This wound causes all the others below. Some wooden people have vigilant blocker and or saboteur. Subselves whose trust must be gained to allow recovery. See goals 5 and 8 below. Accept the general recovery goal. Accept the idea of personality subselves. Then, using some form of inner family therapy, A. Identify all the subselves would lead them. B. Persuade them to trust and follow the resident true self. Harmonize all subselves into effective team over time. The end of recovery is to live authentically from one true self in a relationship and situations. I will stop the video here because I don't have a voice, and I will restart again, okay? Thank you very much and see you in the next video. Bye!